And hello, team, and welcome back this time. Week 5. Wow, are we having fun or what? I think so, and I certainly hope that you think so as well. Kicking it off this week, we are starting with standards and processes. Oh, yeah, it's week 5. Hey, fun. At the end of this week, we're halfway through the term. Yay. And you have a midterm, which is going to ask you to reflect on a scenario based on topics from the first 4 weeks. Okay. So, anyhow, make sure you focus on that. The deadline is Saturday at midnight. Now, kicking it off with standards and processes for success. This is really about processes as a manager. And again, I ask you to, and I'll publish it in the additional links, but you'll want to look at, go to YouTube, and search on Deming, Deming, red bead experiment. It's a 9-minute video. And that's all about processes and how managers can impact the success of their organization based on the rules of the processes that they put in place. Very interesting. So, jumping ahead, though, we're going to take a look right now at the 9 best practices for success as a manager. And remember, week 1 and 2, we began to discuss leaders and managers and the roles. And the leader's role was more in the detail. It was more documentation. It was more accountability, performance feedback, etc. So these are areas you should focus on as a manager. Experience with a lot of clients over the years in a variety of industries and projects have indicated that effective management processes should contain these 9 basic best practices. And so I'm going to walk through them and kind of define these 9 elements that I think are essential to your success as a manager that transforms, and kind of explain why each is a best practice, I think, necessary for successful management endeavors, right? And so, as I mentioned, experience has shown that organizations that employ these to a large extent are the more successful ones. So let's just get started and take a look at the things you should be doing as a manager that transforms. First, you want to make sure that you define the life cycle and the milestones. Okay. So organizations need to map out and define the phases that your team is going to go through. What deliverables are you working on? What key milestones will get you there that you want to up channel to senior leadership at the milestones, right? This is what they should be focused on while you're managing more of the details. And so realize that there are 4 phases to any life cycle. There's this conceptualization and planning, and then you implement slash execute, and then close it out. So, and this can be applied in any industry at the management level. And so adopting this basic 4-phase approach, it provides a common understanding, again, across all industry lines. So every firm has management activities that put into phases, and these phases, these 4, we're going to fit inside your organization. In addition, you'll want to make sure that the other tools, which I think we're going to touch on in a minute, incorporate. You want to make sure that we communicate with stakeholders about the work you're doing and the strategic alignment that we've talked about in previous weeks. You'll want to be aware of the technical processes, how they're used, and how sometimes the technical processes can dictate what phases we're going to go through in producing whatever deliverable it is that we are managing. So, for example, and this is just a wild example, some might be called pre-contract phase, and then there might be a contract phase, and then there might be a construction phase or a turnover phase. Maybe you would define phases such as startup phase, an analysis phase, a design phase, a development phase, implementation phase, maybe a post-implementation audit phase, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, the greatest benefit is establishing the phases that fit your industry and defining the milestones and the criteria that you can manage them along the way. That is part one of your success in management that transforms. Then you have to look at the requirements and the scope of what you're doing. Scope is largely the objectives, and the requirements are the more detailed items that must be delivered that support these overall objectives. So effective management is going to require requirements through scope, and the objectives, right? And you want to make sure that they become stable, and then you want to track them through each phase that we just talked about on the previous slide. And so you'll want to answer these kind of questions when establishing your requirements under your objectives. What is to be done? What are the goals and benefits, as we talked about last week? What are the deliverables that support those goals and benefits at the strategic level? And what are the standards of performance that will make sure these deliverables work? And what are the constraints, limits, or risks as a manager to delivering these requirements along the way? Another item for success is to understand the type of organization and the roles that you play or others play within your organization. So in any organization, managers have to understand and define roles. Remember, I think we've talked about in conflict, maybe we haven't touched on conflict management yet, but we will. And know that when we get there, one of the first things you do to reduce conflict in any management role is to clarify roles and responsibilities. Okay. And so we're going to touch on that here at the bottom of the slide in just a minute. Those are just two of the many as an example. But are you working in a functional organization where you might have straight up vertical lines, right? Where the functional manager has the ultimate power, and others have to form relationships with them. The functional manager owns the resources, owns the budget. They own the experts, and others, like other managers, like a project manager, has to learn to work with them, to request it, to create a relationship. That's called a siloed organization. You might have maintenance in one silo, operations in another silo, intelligence in another, or research in another silo, right? And so it's going to change your power and authority and how you interact with each other. Some companies, Express Scripts was one example, are projectized organizations. Everything is around a project. There aren't really functional managers. And so now there are, but they are limited in power. So now it's the project manager that has the ultimate authority, and others, like the functional manager or other leadership, have to learn to work with them. Most of us work in a matrix organization. So if we do, well, we have two bosses. That's the nickname for a matrixed organization. Two bosses. We have to ask ourselves, is it a weak matrix, a strong matrix, or a balanced matrix, right? A weak matrix means the functional manager largely has the authority. In a strong matrix, some other manager, like the project manager, is going to have the authority. And in a balanced matrix, then this is not necessary. In a balanced matrix, there's a shared power. But oftentimes, the type of matrix is not said, and it confuses people. So you want to clarify that. And most of us are going to work in a matrix organization. Uh, Once you understand your type of organization, and on the last slide, we talked about the importance of scope. Now you'll want to understand how these roles and responsibilities relate to each other within this organization to accomplish the scope. These are just two examples: a functional manager, a project manager, could be a corporate sponsor, could be somebody at the executive suite, could be an analyst. There's so many roles, there's just not enough room. But this is really the essence of what we're getting at in to be a successful manager that transforms. Now, successful management that transforms also requires good, solid quality assurance, right? And so many managers' processes are just inadequate in the quality dimension. And so quality in a management perspective, it requires us to identify the standards and the criteria to be set in each of those phases that we talked about in the life cycle of our deliverable. And so quality means making and meeting agreed to commitments with a constant eye for improvement. And I would add communication. Right? In fact, this is what the term Kaizen means. It's a Japanese term. I don't speak Japanese, but I understand it means constant improvement, even in little things, okay? But you'll want to be familiar with your product quality, right? Does the government require some quality standard like OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration? Does your customer or client demand some level of quality? And you want to identify it in the criteria and specify it. And then in each phase of your life cycle, in each phase, you want to identify and make sure somebody is looking at it. That's called quality assurance, measuring it, testing it, touching it, so that you can meet the requirements of scope and continuously improve. Now, you also, as a manager that transforms, want to understand planned commitments. So plans that you make as a manager have to be based on the process capability of the organization, not wishful thinking, right? Plans must be more than just a schedule. In that the plans have to address all of these 9 elements of successful management that we're talking about right now, okay? Including planning, the management effort, scheduling, resource allocation, budgeting, scope, as we've already talked about, mission and goals, personnel needs, skill levels, how you're going to evaluate and control the work and the workers, future potential risks. Risks are both threats and opportunities. So potential risks and how you may solve them, right? A risk by definition is just an uncertainty. We don't know whether it'll happen. We tend to think of risks as threats. We're raised, Joey, don't run out in the street, right? We think of risks as threats, but risks are also opportunities as managers. And then quality should be considered, as we've already talked about. Keep in mind, this is a little note that I add. You have plans, and then you look at results. In the plan, you have plan data versus the actual data, and you're looking to identify gaps and should you make changes. That's the essence of balancing these planned commitments.